So, welcome to this week's edition of People Over Politics. Last week was Thanksgiving holiday season. We have Christmas coming up. It's the first week of December. And, I have a very special guest today. They call me the Cannabis Councilman, and making sure that, we come up with sensible policy is something that I commonly say. So, with that being said, I wanted to introduce, someone that, many in the cannabis community and advocacy community know, Jason Ortiz, the executive director for Students for Sensible Drug Policy, SSDP, for some people who don't know. Thanks for joining us, Jason.
Right on. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
For sure. Jason, for people who don't know about you and don't know about the organization, give us the rundown. Give us the Reader's Digest version.
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Jason Ortiz. I'm the Executive Director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. We are a youth-led nonprofit that has both a C3 and a C4 because we do political action. And we have over 100 chapters throughout the country, and we train young people to be able to change the drug policies in their communities, whatever drug policies they think need to be changed. And so we cover all drugs. We talk about cannabis, psychedelics, more stigmatized drugs. We also talk about the collateral consequences of drug policy, things like employment, housing, and access to education is one of the big ones for us at SSDP. Personally, I was one of the folks that was arrested for cannabis when I was 16 years old. I'm from New London, Connecticut. I just got arrested in Norwich, Connecticut, and got thrown out of school at a young age. Got ripped from my support structures, making sure that I couldn't work with my other friends and other students. Had to get kicked out of school for a year into the criminal justice system. Luckily, did not get incarcerated, but was able to learn about the criminal justice system from direct interactions with countless court dates that, definitely showed me the criminal justice system was not operating in the best interest of my community. And I learned some terms that kind of changed my life, which were the war on drugs, the school to prison pipeline, and selective enforcement. Those three terms, which kind of shaped my politics after that. From there, I was lucky enough, thanks to the work of cannabis activists who did change the financial aid penalties, go to the University of Connecticut, graduate, find my homies at the chapter of SSDP at UConn, eventually became on the national board of SSDP, which is when I got exposed to national level policy. And then now, today, I'm the executive director of the organization. So I'm one of the first folks to kind of go through the system and then get put into executive leadership. Outside of SSDP, I was also the last president of the Minority Cannabis Business Association, where we worked on a tremendous amount of equity policies. I was one of the founders of the organization with Jesse Horton and Shalene Title and a lot of big titans in the space. Wanda James was also part of that initial cohort. And so, a lot of big names on that list. And I was lucky enough to be the community organizer that they chose to join the team, worked on the policy with Shalene, eventually president, and then now, working with SSDP more purposefully. And then lastly, I'll say in Connecticut, where I'm born and raised, we did fight over equity policies here in Connecticut when we did pass legalization last year. And so I got all kinds of feelings about what that, ended up happening and what ended up coming of that in the details. But we did legalize. We did make it where folks like myself, who were 16 at the time, will no longer be arrested for cannabis possession in the state of Connecticut. And so for a personal level, right, being able to change the laws that impacted me so negatively has always made it where policy and activism has been a big part of my life and will be forever.
Wow. I mean, it was a lot to take in. I was trying to take notes while it was going on, but you have a awesome story, and yours is a grassroots story. So you grew in the organization. You went from that organizer, just involved student right after the troubling situation and the war on drugs hit you, right? And so now you're in leadership and you're leading with compassion, you're leading with empathy, because you've been there, you understand.
Yep.
And so that's important. And so to be clear, maybe I didn't hear it, is why did SSDP start? Why is there a Students for Sensible Drug Policy organization?
Sure. So in 1998, when I was 14, 15 years old, the organization was founded to address a very specific law, the Higher Education Act's federal aid elimination penalty. This was a law primarily championed by then villain legislator Mark Souder, and he made it where anyone that got arrested for any drug crime whatsoever would not be able to access financial aid for university level schooling. And so this law would have prevented me from going to the University of Connecticut had it not been changed. And so in 98, the organization was formed. There was 7 schools that formed the beginning of SSDP specifically to change that law. And so they hammered that law for 20 years until recently, I believe it was 2017, it got completely repealed. But they did it little by little over those 20 years. And that's what made it possible for me to go to college and learn about the space and know that it is possible to take a really terrible, big problem like the war on drugs, denying financial aid, and eventually piece by piece and brick by brick, dismantle that to the point where further generations don't have to experience the same thing.
I mean, that's great. And, I really didn't know. I've heard of the organization, but I didn't know that that's why it started. And as I'm watching the organization, one of the best things I love to see is young present leaders and not future leaders, because I think I was at a middle school today and I was telling them the reason I say present is because back in the day, they used to say, wait your turn. Your turn is now. And that's what I've been expressing them. Your turn is now. We want to hear from you. We want you to voice your opinions. We want to empower you to advocate and learn how to advocate. And so, like, I kept saying present leaders because I said, how many of you guys know Greta Thunberg? And he's, the reason you know Greta is because she started opening her mouth and speaking her mind to lawmakers and really making waves. And the reason she made waves is because she says, hey, I'm a person, I'm a lot younger than you. I'm not as seasoned as you, but I do know that something needs to be done. We only have a few, and kind of in a frank way, what she said to them, is, hey, older generation, you guys only have a few more summers left. Stop declining because, me and my colleagues have to live here for a lot longer. Mm-hmm. So, let's think about the future. Let's be proactive, not reactive, as we so commonly are. And so, like, that's one of the things I really love when I listen to Laura's story. One, I feel like her activism is going to make her a better public servant, right? And so whether she decides this avenue for her or not, I feel like her advocacy helped her, it's always going to help her in life, like how to reach out to your elected officials, how to write position statements, really just how to advocate. So, but also one of the things that I heard was her story. She became intimately involved with drug policy and its immorality when she had a family member who was really impacted by it.
Right.
They're on, I think she expressed they passed away. So that was very tragic. But, that's just how a lot of people come to it, right? When we're talking about drug policy now, a lot of people are talking about mental health as opposed to the criminalization. At least they should be. And, we should get on them if they're not. But the thought is like, I forgot where my point I was going with that, but I got on my soapbox. But yeah.
I was like, yeah, it's true.
But, what I was gonna say was, have you ever heard of the Japanese American Student Conference?
I feel like somebody actually reached out to us recently about this because it was happening in Maryland and they wanted to focus on a day on drug policy, right?
Yes. So I got to participate and I brought along Delegate Gabriel Acevedo, the People's Champ from Montgomery County, and Natasha Andrews, the National Association of Black Cannabis Lawyers. And it was a very interesting discussion because we talked about the policies that Japan has in relation to cannabis and, some of the stigmas and how it was very different from America. But then we also just talked about how those policies that are happening now are going to shape the future and just kind of expressing them that you change life through policy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's why, SSDP appeals to so many different people because it doesn't have to be content specific what we're working on. What you learn at SSDP is how to be confident in your position, how to research your position, how to speak clearly and articulate exactly what you want to see changed in a very short amount of time. And those kind of skills are transferable to every issue you could possibly ever work on, right? And if you have to advocate it for yourself because you're in court or because you're a lawyer, right? Like all those skills, you want to be able to do it to the best of your ability. And so that's where seeing all the young folks take it and run with it, we give them the tools, we sharpen the swords for them, but they're the ones that go out and actually get the wins. So for example, in Athens, Georgia, Raiden Washington, who is our vice chair of our board, they made cannabis possession only a $35 fine, right? Like that had nothing to do with that's not true. Jeremy Sharp was definitely very helpful, but it was the folks on the ground leading the charge to make that happen, and they were able to improve the environment for the entire community because they did that and took that charge and decided we're going to work on making this a real thing. And it's not easy to say we're going to do cannabis policy in Georgia, right? And so they're doing that in every community around the country, and so people see SSDPers speaking very confidently, and that shows that, like, if you're talking about climate change or renting prices or zoning in your community, being able to do it from a place of conviction and intelligence and articulating specifically what you want is going to be super helpful and important. The other thing I think for us is a focus on policy specifically, that yes, we want to have an understanding of the intersectionality of all issues, but we need to come to the table with a concrete ask and a concrete solution that we're using that as the focus of discussion, not we need to end racism. Yes, we are an anti-racist org. We agree. We need to eliminate racism in all of its different forms, and each day specifically talk about a very specific part of that and how we're going to replace each and every one. We can't come with just rhetoric. And I think that's what people really love about SSDP. It's the skills training to do any issue, but it's also figuring out how we move from complaining about what we see is wrong in society to actually replacing it with something better.
You said it better than I can say it, but skills training is what I was speaking towards. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've seen is recently you guys did a demonstration, I think partnering with Last Prisoners Project.
That's right.
And a few other people in the cannabis community. I would have loved to attend because I'm the Cannabis Councilman. I'm a big advocate, but I couldn't. So tell us about the demonstration, why it happened, who was there, and how it went.
Yeah, so that was one of my favorite days with SSDP I've ever been a part of it. So we did some real direct action, took the streets of the DC, actually 17th Street, which is on the west side of the White House, was ours for a number of hours. And so it all started actually many months prior to that action. I had wanted to do something more direct action oriented with the broader movement because I felt like we had shifted away from really engaging directly with communities, directly with power structures, and we're trying to white paper our way to freedom, right? As somebody told me before, right? That like you can have all this analysis and all this policy, right? But like if you don't have any pressure, if you're not involving the public, you don't have any power to push those really good laws you just came up with. And so back in like the National Cannabis Festival time, like around 420 in DC, we started to have conversations of like, what would that look like? What kind of partners made sense? And it was the Last Prisoner Project that really enthusiastically endorsed the idea and saying, we really need to be doing this specifically to pressure President Biden to release folks from federal prison because he has the ability to do it right now without anybody else's approval and can do it wholeheartedly, and did say that he was going to do it.
So that's what we said. Keep up with the promise.
The promise that he said in debate, right? Like he said it in like public time, multiple times actually technically, but there's one where he's debating Cory Booker that he makes it very clear. He says, everybody out, records expunged. Like there's just everybody out, right? Like there was no qualifiers on that. And so
one, I wanted to mention that's just the first step because we know that from a federal level, there's not many people, there serving simple possession charges.
So, but for us, it wasn't just simple possession, right? So we were demanding that everybody out. Everybody that's in there for a nonviolent cannabis offense should be let out immediately. And partly the reason we're saying that is because there are lots of places where sales and cultivation are now legal. There are people making billions of dollars selling cannabis in Florida and Illinois and California. And so what we're legalizing is not just possession. The country is legalizing sales. And so this is an important point of the political moment that is an economic crime, right? He is saying we're going to allow you to possess it, but you can't make any money off of it. You can buy it from my homies and pay taxes on it, but if you buy it for your homies, that's a crime. And
the legacy market, the legacy.
Sure, you know what I mean? Like, and I am and was in the legacy market, right? Mm-hmm. Like the amount of folks that have grown cannabis, sold cannabis, are currently paying their bills with cannabis. When we have, there's banks that service folks that have been doing all kinds of activity for a long time. And so it's very important to me that we shift how we think about the drug dealer, right? And this is for all drugs as well. That the person that is engaging in economic activity, we need to talk about it on an economic plane, right? The reason people sell drugs is because it's expensive, it makes a lot of money because it's illegal. And so how we approach that and get the president to come to understand that is not going to happen by writing letters nicely, right? Like, we got to get in the streets and really show them that we really care about this, that we are talking beyond whatever he was planning on doing. And we can show that this makes sense for the political moment, right? Like, legalization of cannabis is a 91% support issue. There is nobody out there's very few people that don't support legalization. And when they say that, they mean sales, right? Most people, when you ask what's legalization, would that include buying weed? Yes, right? Like, that would include it. And so I think we have the moment, the political moment, to really push, right? And we did. And so, we brought the Last Prisoner Project, that does fantastic work with getting folks out of prison, both at the federal and state level. We're going to continue that work at the state level next year. And then also folks from Freedom Grow was another organization that was supportive.
I met some folks there.
Yeah, they were great. Kristen Floor, shout out to Kristen. She did fantastic work.
Yes.
Yeah, and all the folks at Freedom Grow.
I was trying to help raise advocacy for John Wall.
Yeah, and so he's a perfect example, right, of a young man now, like relatively recent, that it's because of trafficking, right? But he was not somebody that should be
RICO charges, RICO conspiracy charges. I've never heard of RICO.
It's wild, and President Biden fought to implement a lot of these laws in the 90s. A lot of the reason why these laws have such extreme punishments is because of the work that Biden specifically personally did. So to have him be the source of a lot of the problem, promise to solve it, demanding that your president follow through and what he says he's going to do is the most American thing we could possibly do. And so I wanted to make sure that both our students, but also the broader movement remembers there are other ways to affect social change than just writing posts, right? We got to be mobilizing. We got to get out there. And I'll be honest, like, when it comes to inspiring and mobilizing your base to continue to do work, there's nothing better than direct action. Every one of the students that participated left, like, when are we doing more? How are we going to get involved locally, right? I could put 1,000
communities there.
Right, exactly. And so the folks from Adam Eidinger and Chris Furnish from DC Marijuana Justice and Maryland Marijuana Justice, right? Like, to have them come and teach our students, everybody was so appreciative of each other's work. And it's one of those things that at the end of the day, everybody left supercharged, not exhausted, but ready to escalate and step it up. And so, definitely check it out, ssdp.org. It's on our blog. You'll be able to see it's the title, "We Made Good Trouble at the White House Today." And it's got all kinds of beautiful, gorgeous pictures of the work we did. But I'll say the interesting thing was when we took the streets, they refused to arrest us. And that was one thing that we were confused exactly how to proceed, because they're like, we're not going to have any arrests today. Like, unless y'all, escalate further, you could sit in the streets as long as you want. And so we had a giant 50-foot joint blocking the road. And so we had to make the decision of, like, are we going to move the location? My original plan was to stay there until rush hour and see if they were going to keep that promise the whole time. But we ended up moving because President Biden spoke at the DNC and then was like driving in. And so we ended up moving back to the front, where SSDP board member Sarah Noon ended up getting arrested, sneaking through the gate of the White House.
Yeah, I saw that one.
that was wild. That was a little surprising, but she saw an opportunity. The door was wide open, and literally she just walked through the door. Like, she didn't jump a fence or anything. The door was open, and she went through it, and that caused a commotion.
Answer this one question, and you, of course, are a good idea.
Sure.
The talk of decrim, legalization, changes in the policy happening, I feel it's eerily convenient that it happened around the midterms. But what is your take on it? Is it just was it a time for this peak? I know right after Biden made that announcement, stocks went up. You know what I mean? And so, like, what exactly was it politically convenient? Because I'd say it was politically convenient, eerily politically convenient, but.
I take it as us winning. That is what winning looks like. When you force the president that you have to take some action on an issue, because they don't do it because of the goodness of their heart, right? They're wondering, is this going to be politically beneficial or politically painful for us to do this action? They did a calculus and that it would be politically beneficial. The reason it's politically beneficial is because we're applying pressure and the public is with us. So whenever I see that happen, it is political expediency on Biden's part, and that's a good thing for us that it is politically expedient to go in our direction. Did he do it as much as we wanted him to? Absolutely not. But also, it was politically, it was very helpful for us because what he did do was focus the entire country on the nuance of cannabis pardon process. Right. So we had a lot of people saying, oh, congratulations, like, way to go. He got this, like, nah, like he didn't do what we're actually asking. Let's explain the difference between possession, sales, RICO, trafficking, cultivation, etc., operating a drug factory. Right. If you grow many plants, you get charged with operating a drug factory. That sounds really bad, but it means you had like 6 plants. Right. And so for me, I was disappointed that it wasn't exactly what I wanted, but I am glad that he did it when he did it. Because one, it did help some people. One of our alumni was actually featured in the New York Times, Valerie DeRoe, as somebody that did get arrested in a Utah national park. And so it did help her. But then when we went out there and started to do all of these actions, folks were like, wait a minute, I thought this was already handled. Now we're having a national conversation on the nuances of the clemency process, which 2 weeks before that, it would have been really difficult for us to get the attention that he ended up helping us get.
You're right. A lot of times it takes media and political pressure. It was almost a double-edged question because I'm a little bit of like I feel like I'm a nihilist and a realist at the same time. So I see the evils that exist, but I'm realistic about them. And so I say a first step because I believe that Biden's steps were well-intentioned. But I just want to let people know that that's not the last step that needs to be taken, right? And I appreciate you for saying about possession, distribution, RICO charges, because I've been saying that for as long as I can, for as long as I can remember, and definitely saying that now that I have a platform to speak from, because the thought is like not just simple possession. We need to make sure that free is free, right? And so if your friends can sell weed, my friends should be able to sell weed as well. But I understand they're trying to keep from this black market, but as you understand, regulation doesn't prevent the black market. So that's a bigger conversation, right? Like,
oh, for sure, and especially going through a legalization process, you see up close and personal how this is not about safety, that this is about money and controlling that flow of money. And Maryland is about to go through this next year, right? And even with the ballot measure passing, you still have to create regs. And you're still going to have the legislature is going to put some sort of details, right, of like how we're going to do it. And so y'all are going to have to go through a legislative fight over the details. And
this year you're carving out the details. That's this year.
Yo, exactly. And so like come with your own policy, right? Like, that's what I always recommend to every advocate in the space, that don't leave it up to the state to introduce a bill and then you try to amend it. Draft what you want, find an effective legislator to introduce it, and then you're competing with getting your piece in the final legislation, but you have to write it down. So it's very clear, and it's clear to the public, and it's clear to potential legislative allies what exactly it is that you're doing. Because you can get a lot of those pieces in there. Things like, how do you define equity, right? Like that question alone is going to take up a lot of space in the room. And if you don't come with your own definition, you're going to let the rich white folks define equity. And so making sure that you're ready with that. And what does it mean in practice, right? What does it mean for labor rights? What does it mean for reforming housing authority rules, right? What does it mean for universities? And can a student that has a medical marijuana card even have medical marijuana on campus after legalization? Right now, most places say no. You can still be.
UMD said no. I saw UMD. They put out an announcement.
Exactly, right. And so, but that's where SSDP can come in on that specific one. So let us know if that happens, because we want to help any university.
No, I will trust and believe. One of the things that you brought up, right, was the fact that we as advocates and consumers need to bring the bill to the lawmakers, right, and tell them what we want. Because I told people that voting for it is the first step.
Yes.
The second step and the continued step is staying engaged, to make sure that a wool is not pulled over your eyes, to make sure that it's not like the casino when we voted for it and they said we were going to get millions and millions for our schools, and it just went back to the general fund and not a lot of schools were built. You know what I mean? And there wasn't actual equity in the medical program. So the thought is I want equity in all aspects, not just the dispensary, cultivation, processor, even those ancillary businesses, right? And even in a dispensary, I don't want to just see that they work in a dispensary. I want to see that there's owners. I want to see that they're in leadership. I want to see that they're treated right. I believe that we should talk about collective bargaining as we bring in this recreational market, because we've seen abuses happen in the cannabis industry. So
and in Connecticut, we actually ran our equity bill through the Labor Committee, and the UFCW was a big part of drafting and pushing for that particular type of equity, because Connecticut is a very labor positive state. Like, they play a strong role, and it's very, I would say, amicable. It's confrontational, but they are not under assault as like an institution, right? Like, people like unions. And so here, making sure that we put labor rights, home grow rights in the definition of what equity core function will be is going to be vital over what it looks like in practice. So, for example, we made sure that there was lines in the law that said a specific apprenticeship program must be created with certain outlines of who would be impacted and who would be allowed to go into the program. Of course, we defined equity as folks that were actually directly impacted or had a number of other ways that were involved in the criminal justice system, mostly arrest and incarceration, would be the primary recipients of that. So if you got a cannabis crime, you could sign up to be in this apprenticeship program, right? Happening was a very different, bizarre thing, what the governor created, right? Because it warped the definition of what it meant to be an equity advocate to exclusively a geographic designation. And we get in the weeds of like why that doesn't work, but it's too broad, right? And who it includes. And so, for example, if you're in a space that is relatively over-policed, but there has been gentrification in that space, like around Yale, New Haven, Connecticut, right? You could be somebody that lives in a place that in the 90s had really high arrest records, but now houses folks that are relatively wealthy and they qualify for it, right? And so defining who can and can't qualify for different things becomes very important. There's generally the urge to widen the definition to include more people and more things, right? And I understand that is a positive intent, right? Like, people want to help as many people as possible, but you end up filling the group to be so big that the folks that were really impacted, the formerly incarcerated, the currently incarcerated, get to be a tiny fraction and get outcompeted by the folks that are on the privileged end of whatever spectrum you create, right? And so if we have our incarcerated folks are least able to access resources, and we expand it to say all Black and brown people, the wealthy Black and brown people are going to be the ones that take up all of those opportunities, right? I'm one of those people that I'm probably more over here. I was arrested, right? But I wasn't incarcerated. You put people like me in that pool, I will outcompete all of those other people, right? Especially if the licenses are extraordinarily limited. If anyone can get a license, I can help those people get a license. If you say there's only going to be 2 licenses for the whole state, I'm now in competition with those people for those 2 licenses. So the difference in whether or not we have a license cap can make the world's difference of like how we are either competing with each other or able to cooperate with each other.
But let me ask you this: you've been all over. You do a lot of different states. I think that New Jersey is doing some things right.
Sure.
Not everything. But I think they're doing some things right, especially with the conditional licenses. So making sure you don't need real estate to apply, making sure that the fees are low to initially apply. I think that's what actual social equity looks like. But in conjunction with things like New York City, not New York State, New York City, but they put 20 million in actually buying properties to give to social equity applicants after they're approved, right? Like, I mean, of course you could tell me more about how that project's actually going to work and if it's actually going to be as magical as we think. But those are some things that I think, and the micro, making sure that there's the micro licenses and micro businesses as well. But I think that making sure there's an incubation, if you need, business knowledge, you need help, assistance, you can go there, it's available. The thought is they should have the opportunity to fail, like you said, but they should have the resources available.
Sure. And each state has different approaches to it. And it's similar in that, like, you could look at a state and say, is their education system good or bad, right? That's too simplistic of a way to look at. There's parts that they do really well. There's probably other parts that could be improved. Every state has different things. Same thing is going to be with the cannabis equity programs, right? Every state has some parts of it that make sense. Connecticut passed policy where they bonded, or they're going to bond, $50 million into the fund, right? I argue it should be the state that covers the startup costs because it's the state that incarcerated people. The cannabis companies never incarcerated anybody, right? Like, I don't think it makes sense for them to be the exclusive, provider of money that goes into any of these equity funds. one of the tricky things in the New York system, which was that, they partnered with Chris Webb and Weber, and like where the money comes from, the devil is definitely in the details there, because it's 50 million comes from the state and 150 million from private capital. What is the exact agreements that folks have to repay that if they access this? And the New York licenses that are the turnkey guard applications, right? Another fascinating thing there about real estate. And if you're giving me a business that already has been negotiated, a lot of the details, as long as it's a good contract that they walk into, that's great. But if it's not, they're kind of stuck, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how it works. And as we look to Illinois, New York, New Jersey, Maryland gets to take all the good that came out of all those states and put that.
It was a long time to get to this point, so we should be taking a lot.
Right, fair. But that's the good thing of moving later, right? Is you can go, yo, Jersey, I like the way you rolled out micro licenses. I like the way you structured your cannabis commission. New York, I like the way you funded it, but I don't like the way you defined equity, right? Or whatever it may be. And get your cohort together where you don't have to rewrite legislation. You can just pull from all. Like Illinois' R3 program was a good structure, like whether or not it played out and got funded enough to make an impact it wanted to is a different story. But as far as frameworks go, right, maybe it's Massachusetts, how they did their timeline is good or bad, right? Because timelines are also really important. You could have a great program, but if you put equity starts after the MSOs, the whole thing becomes irrelevant, right? So, but that's not a question of like, are these two going to happen? It's which one happens first. And so if you could fight over the timeline where you just say equity day one, right? Nobody opens till an equity operator opens, right? Like
I like it. Equity day one. Equity day one. I know the talking point. Equity day one.
And what that does, if you say equity folks have to open first, the MSOs now have a financial incentive to get them open faster, right? Because it means they'll be able to open faster and get that first day one, obviously more competition, but you put them in a political situation where if the equity program isn't successful, they have to wait and they're going to lose out to other state markets, right? And so by creating that like financial incentive for them to help equity open faster, now in your cooperative experience, right? Rather than competitive. What happens in other places, if you put the big money first, they then get to make a lot of money that they can then spend delaying.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Okay. Well, I of course I want to call you. We're going to chat offline, but I got a few rapid questions for you. My first rapid question is, how many chapters are in SSDP?
It fluctuates a little over 100 at around 30 states.
Oh, awesome. Okay, well, I got to get a full list because as I continue to travel around the country,
SSDP.org/chapters.
/chapter. Because as I continue to go around, the U.S. and check out different areas and policy, like I'll be going back to Colorado, I'll be going to Oregon in New Year, and going to Massachusetts. So I went to school in Massachusetts for a year. I went to school in Rhode Island for about a year. So, familiar with New England. But I'm looking forward to getting back. It's been years since I've been in Boston, and there's been a lot that's changed in the world of cannabis, I'm hearing. And so, I can't wait to get to that, but I also can't wait to take a day trip to Maine because my friends assured me that Maine has the best cannabis. And, I can say that I had some organic soil, organic living soil at the National Cannabis Festival from one of the dispensaries from Maine. And it was one of the most primo. So I'm definitely looking forward to that New England trip.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me know, man, because I grow the best cannabis in New England. But I've heard good things about Maine.
Understood.
Another thing with SSDP in the South, we just created our HBCU ambassador program. So definitely want to shout out Nadir and DJ, who are folks that have been helping us get that off the ground. We added 10 Black organizers in the South to 10 different HBCUs. And so we got folks Northeast, Connecticut, New York, Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, wherever you're going to be at, let us know because we got SSDPers down to help you turn up either at your governor to help everybody get out of prison or at your next Chamber of Commerce meeting to explain why they should be a part of supporting equity programs.
Absolutely. And to make sure to come at the city level because there's some municipal things that I want to do in relation to, cannabis and law, but we'll talk offline. I know I was talking a little bit to Chelsea from VA, Chelsea Higgs.
Girl, shout out to Chelsea, Virginia. We got
She's a
work
warrior.
in Virginia, man.
She is a warrior out there.
Yeah.
So my other two questions: what is your favorite strain and why?
Ooh, I would say historically it was green crack because it was the most sativa focused strain that I had had in a very long time, right? And it gave me the effect I wanted. And the effect was why I became a grower. And green crack was always what I was like trying to get to. It was that kind of really intense energy that a lot of folks feel like they get paranoid when they're on it, but I loved it. It was like exactly what I wanted. I smoke in the morning. I smoke.
A lot of pinene. Is that got a lot of pinene in it?
A lot of pinene, a lot of limonene, like it's very, like tropical flavors. And then I would say the strain that I most like kicked back and enjoy was when I got Golden Goat out of Colorado. Like Golden Goat is another one that was just like the taste. I don't even know what you know what I mean? Like, but it was just amazing. Yeah.
Favorite superhero and why?
Ooh, favorites. So I identified very strongly with Magneto growing up because of his Brotherhood of Mutants approach to everything. Like I was like, dude has a lot of good points, right? As far as like
he was like a superhero turned villain, though, right?
He was always a villain. I mean, he's like an anti-hero might be the better term for him, right? Green Lantern was another one that I really vibed with a lot because I used to work at a comic book store. That's why I got a long list of them. But Green Lantern was very focused on personal willpower, right? And like being out there and taking agency for problems and solving them. And he just had the ring where anything he could think up in his mind, he could create. And that was always like, I appreciated his like spirit as a person, as a human. He was technically a human. But then, if I ever had to think about like what I would want in real life, I would someday like to have Professor X's School for the Gifted, but located in Puerto Rico. That would be my favorites. Like when I grow up.
That would be pretty dope. And just to segue, I had to ask. I would like to consider myself an otaku, so an admirer of anime. Do you have a favorite anime?
Oh man, we're gonna talk about this all day. Ghost in the Shell, without a doubt, was the first one that changed my life. Like for a long time. I grew up on Dragon Ball Z, but like all of the sci-fi ones were definitely my favorite. Some of the more recent ones I've seen, Drifters. Drifters is a good one that kind of brings a lot of historical figures.
Attack on Titan is newer.
Attack on Titan, definitely. I've seen it all the way, and like what happens, to Eren and how he kind of shifts over time for sure. Like I could understand how he got there, but for me, it was definitely Ghost in the Shell is the one that I rewatched the most, right? And like go back to the original movie and like put it on to think about things.
Ghost in the Shell,
yeah,
great, definitely a classic. Yeah. I'm a Naruto guy.
Okay.
It took me years to get into Naruto, but I'm a Naruto guy, and I feel like I'm a Naruto guy. I told the story to the middle schoolers today. I said Naruto, he's the powerful kid that no one loved. And he didn't even know his own power, right? Until he got older, until he honed his power, and then the power that he or didn't understand, and the power that everyone else didn't know. They came to realize that was actually power, and that was actually strength. And later on, he became Hokage, so he was the great leader, of that land. There years later, and it was really also just the message of like you are in your past, only you can decide your future, So.
Absolutely, man. Yes, I vibe with that, brother. And there have been many fantastic animes, in my time that have helped me reorient my perspective, right? As far as what's important and what power means and how we can use power. I actually think that is where anime has shaped where I'm hopeful that folks that get into community organizing don't become afraid of power or against using power, right? But more understanding that it is a tool within society for us to mobilize and change and do things. And anime was always that, like with great, that's Spider-Man, I was gonna say, but like with great power comes great responsibility, where anime folks go out and they do take charge, right? The isekais out there, they go, we're gonna go change the world. We're gonna fight the bad guys. We're gonna bring people with us. And I vibed with that. I wasn't timid, right? I wasn't someone that was very afraid of challenge. And so I was always looking to the heroes out there that take charge of things and want to make the world a better place.
That's something great that you brought up is like the anime people, they're courageous and creative. And one of the things you also mentioned is don't be afraid to yield your power for good things. So that's a great message to end on. But I wanted to tell people how they can stay connected with you.
Sure. So you can reach me at jason@ssdp.org. Our main website is ssdp.org. And of course, if you want to contribute, help us grow, help us start more chapters. If you know any professors or students that would be interested in starting a chapter, please do get us in touch. We have chapter coordinators across the country, depending on where folks are at. And we have some folks in Maryland too. So definitely reach out. And then lastly, start writing your own laws. And then when you got a group of people that really want to get it down and get a move in, call SSDP and we can help figure out how to make it happen.
Wow, you need that advocacy engine behind you guys. So make sure to tune in with Jason. Jason, I'm gonna make sure to stay connected with you. I apologize. I applaud you for letting me take some of your time to connect. And I know there's a lot of people that are gonna enjoy your message. So I appreciate
it. And we'll see them in the streets one way or another.
Yes, grassroots gets it done. When we organize, we win.
That's right. Exactly. So let's go start some fights.
Yes. So thank you very much. I appreciate you.
All right, brother. Take care.
Everybody, that was our great guest, Jason Ortiz from SSDP. Make sure to check them out. Make sure to check the website. Make sure to check out their social media. I just saw that dope video with Laura Goodfield on Instagram. So you guys on Instagram, SSDP official. And make sure to get engaged in your community. One of the things that I talked to the middle schoolers about today was everybody knows their president, right? They knew Biden, they knew Trump, but nobody knew their mayor, right? And so that was scary to me because it makes me realize that like how much everyone doesn't know about the local government that they live in. But by the time they left that classroom, I promise you they knew who their mayor was. I promise you they knew who their city council was. And if they never hear from me a day in their life, they'll remember that I told them that when you look at an organizational chart, the constituents are at the top. The mayor, who's your president of your city, or your governor of your state, they're right under your constituents because they need to be elected to serve. So with that being said, get engaged, guys. We have a bunch of things going on. We're going to have the General Assembly this year. If we aren't engaged and we don't have an organized message on what we want, they're going to pass anything, right? And we don't want to see that happen. So that's why we need to continue to organize. We need to continue to tell our friends. If your friend didn't know that weed was legal or it has been legalized, tell him and ask him what he wants to see happen, right? Because the thought is the consumers should have a voice in this. So with that being said, I appreciate you guys. And, we're on Black USA. Be More News. We're having our 20th anniversary. So if any of you guys are coming out to celebrate the 20th anniversary, is December 10th of BeMoreNews.com. I've been on this platform for almost a year now. So I'm grateful of Black USA News and Be More News. So definitely tune in and check us out. See you later, guys.
Hey.